and welcome to episode 2 of This Is Not My Job. I am still your host, Carl Mizell. I'm not as of yet the first podcast host to get fired from his own podcast, so that's pretty cool. Thank you for joining me today, whenever today might be for you. Thank you. I also wanted to start off the proceedings by thanking each and every one of you for listening to episode 1. If you are listening to this and this is your first episode, I'm not thanking you, so you can sit this one out. But for those of you who have listened to the first episode with my first guest, John O'Deener, thank you so much. Okay, everybody else for whom this is the first episode, you can come back into the room. Thank you. Thank you for being here. That's the great thing about podcasts. You don't have to listen to them sequentially. There's not like a through line or anything like that. You won't feel like you missed anything if you didn't listen to that first episode. You can go back and listen whenever. The response to the first episode was something else. It's crazy. I think like it's been listened to over 100 times now. I don't even know 100 people. So unless the 10 or 11 friends that I have listen to it 10 or 11 times each, that means that total strangers are finding the show, which is really cool. So if you're a total stranger, thank you. And if you're somebody who isn't a stranger but told somebody that you know but who is a total stranger to me to listen to the show, thank you as well. My guest on the show today is cartoonist Ned Barnett. We had a great chat back in January. The beginning of the episode, I do reference the fact that Ned was the first guest of the show. The shows are not going to be released sequentially, so there might be a little cognitive dissonance there for you, but Ned was the first person that I interviewed. I did a batch of 5 interviews over the course of about 10 days just to make sure that I had enough content to release while I was starting to wrangle the next batch of interviews. So he was kind enough to join me. I want to say I think it was Monday, the 11th of January. Yeah, that sounds about right. So we do reference that. So don't let that confuse you too much. And we carried on and talked about a whole bunch of different things. But one thing I do, it's not really a content warning or anything. There is some extensive conversation vis-a-vis our experiences with quarantine and COVID and that sort of thing. It's not anything stressful, I don't think, but if you're tired of hearing about COVID, you might want to just kind of fast forward past that portion, because we just talk about our experiences and how it affected our lives in 2020, and specifically our mental health. Again, nothing too deep or heavy or anything like that, but just wanted to make you aware of that. So with all of that said, let's get the ball rolling on my conversation with cartoonist Ned Barnett. Hello, and welcome to this episode of This Is Not My Job. I'm your host, Carl Mizell, and today I am joined by a cartoonist whose work focuses on heroes, health, and history. His debut graphic novel, Dreamers of the Day, was released in 2019. Let's try it like that. 2019? Nobody says it like that. And was hailed by Multiversity Comics as one of the best graphic novels of 2019. Ned Barnett, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Good, thanks. It's great to be here, Carl.
Thank you. Now, as we were talking just before the start of this, before we actually hit record, you are my first guest on the show.
I am. Sorry, I just had immediately we start talking and I get a ding from my husband because I forgot to tell him I was recording this right now.
You know what? We're going to leave it in.
Okay.
We're just going to leave it in.
It's
2021. Great. It's no market improvement over 2020 so far. So let's just leave it in. So I want to bring something up because you brought up an excellent point. So prior to this, I sent out the little questionnaire that I ultimately scrapped because I realized that it was a flawed system. But you brought up something very interesting that I wanted to address, which is the title of the show. This is not my job. You're absolutely right. It does sound a little weird. And it does sound like I'm implying, you said that maybe that's kind of weird. It sounds like maybe the art isn't our job.
Yeah.
And that's not it.
I didn't think that's what it was that you meant.
Yeah. No, so I want to take this like 3 seconds to clear the air. It's just this literally this thing right here. This is not my job. But I like the idea of talking because I know you've been very vocal, especially on Twitter, about blending those two worlds together. You have a day job. You have your cartoons, your comics. how do you draw that line? How do you find that? And this is sort of a big picture question that we can kind of zero in on, but how do you sort of manage those two sides of your life? Because you have to have that job, but you also have this desire to create.
Yeah. So up until actually 2019, I was working full time in full time marketing job. I left that job in February 2019 with the intention that I was going to go do comics full time. I didn't have anything really set out. We've been very fortunate in that we paid off all of my student loans within a couple of years of being married. My husband doesn't have student loans because it's a lot cheaper in the UK to do your degree, and he had his master's and PhD fully funded. And then I actually, upon getting back from the trip that I immortalized in Dreamers of the Day, started working at a new job where I do marketing for a university library part-time. And that's just great because I do that 20 hours a week, and then I have the rest of the week to do comics in all sort of areas that is, not just sitting and writing them, but the way that I scheduled my schedule is that I work the day job Tuesday, Wednesday, and half day Thursday, so that in the days of conventions, I could leave either Thursday evening or I could leave Friday morning to get to a show and not have to worry about missing work. So that's sort of how I had it scheduled. With working from home for almost a year now, the lines sort of get blurred even more. I make a point not to work on my day job stuff except for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. But if there's a training that I want to attend that's on a Monday or Friday, then I just rework my schedule a little bit and do that. And yeah, it's been kind of tough to have that real extreme blurring of lines. Part of what I really enjoy about having a day job is that I can leave my house and I can go to the office and I can see people, and I have a life outside of making comics, because otherwise comics is a very lonely thing to do, and especially when you're just sitting making them. And having the day job was great to make sure that I got out and socialized and saw people. Not the case for the time being, but it also helps a lot because I am not really at a stage in my comics career where I'm pulling in a lot of money. Comics is a lot of setting the groundwork. So the work that I did in 2018 all built on what I was doing in 2019, which built into what I was doing in 2020, which I was able to take a lot of what I had done and built up on in previous years to get my name known and get some things like starting to have conversations about future projects that I won't start working on for another year or two in some cases, which is very strange to be like, I don't know what I'm going to be doing in 2021, but I know what I'll be doing in like 1 month of 22, but I can't talk about any of those.
Yeah, so, that's you just touched.
Everything I'm doing is redacted.
Well, no, you just touched on something that is very common in comics book world for those who are listening who might not be familiar with the world of comics. A lot of times artists, it seems like more artists than writers, get caught in NDA hell, non-disclosure agreement hell, or in this case, you might not have that, but you just can't talk about it. And that is something that is not especially unique to comics, but that is something that happens where and that's kind of one of the good things about, I think, lack of cons maybe, is the fact that you can't go to cons and see all your friends and then just talk about all the things you can't talk about.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, like, I think everyone has a couple people who are the friend DAs, and like I tell my partner about everything that's going on, because otherwise to be like, why are all these books about this period of time showing up at the house? And also, like, it's something that I'm excited about and I want him to be excited about. And yeah, so it's one of those things. Like, I think everyone has the friend DA, but we don't talk beyond like as a very small supportive group of people who know not to take things beyond. So yeah, but there's so much groundwork that you need to just lay, and getting your name out there, getting your work known. And I'm so glad that I am working a part-time job, because it makes it a lot easier to switch my brain off of comics 20 hours a week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just trying to do this around a 40-hour work week, even in the midst of the pandemic, Google Calendars is a lifesaver. You talked about the isolation that can sort of fall on an artist, and that is something that's kind of unique to somebody like yourself, who not only draws but writes the comics that you create. And so you talked about having that part-time job is sort of like helping out with the sanity there, and that's great because comics traditionally is a collaborative medium.
I am starting to branch into doing more writing and collaboration with other people. I've made the decision last year that I was going to be really picky about the art that I decide to do. It's drawing comics is a very physically demanding job, and I don't think that people outside of an art space really recognize how potentially damaging it is to your body. So I've decided that I'm going to be very picky about what I draw, and I'm a little less picky about what I write, but I still want it to stick within my frame of heroes, health, and history. I really want to be working on things that excite me and that I'll be able to really put my heart into, because I can tell when there's a project that I don't really have my heart and soul in. And I'm sure that my readers can as well.
Absolutely. And I want to follow up on that a little bit later, because I want to talk about your diary project. But you mentioned the 3 H's: heroes, health, and history. Where did your interest in those fields start to develop, and when did you start to marry those to your passion for art?
So I've always loved history, to the point that when I was trying to decide what I was going to study in college, I was like, am I going to do an English degree or am I going to do a history degree? I ended up doing an English degree, and I haven't actually taken a university history course ever. I AP examed out of it. Largely, I just wasn't interested in any of the classes that were being offered at my school. And where I have my very specific and weird niche history interests, I found that it was more worth my time to be able to just sit down and read what I was interested in. And that it went from like things like, I've always loved military history. That's always sort of been my thing. And particularly British military history. I was an absolutely huge Nelsonic Navy buff when I was in high school. So like Master and Commander era. And I read extensively and was writing stories set in that time period. Dragged my father, who was actually very happy that I was into it because he loves that stuff too, to Greenwich in 2006, so we could go to an exhibit about Horatio Nelson and Napoleon Bonaparte. And then I sort of moved into the Royal Air Force when I was in college, specifically like Battle of Britain. And after graduating college, but before starting graduate school, in that summer, I ended up picking up a biography of T.E. Lawrence by Michael Korda. And that is where all of the things sort of started to align with my interests and my interest in biography, my interest in history. And I knew I wanted to do something about Lawrence from essentially day one. I wasn't quite sure what. I kept trying to figure out how to work him into my graduate school work, but that didn't happen. I ended up focusing on another interest of mine for graduate school work, which is surveillance and CCTV as a narrative device, and did a lot of work around that. I remember 2013 when all the Snowden stuff came out, just being very happy that I had done my degree the year beforehand. Otherwise, I would have been constantly rewriting my thesis as more and more information was coming out. So, but then when I started making comics, it was like, what is it that I want to do? And I realized that I wanted to do a comics biography of Lawrence. And yeah, so that's where heroes and history came in. But health really came into it because I have generalized anxiety disorder, depression, and ADHD. And one of the first sort of projects that I was doing on a regular basis was what I was calling my anxiety diaries, where I was writing about what I was going through emotionally as I lived through generalized anxiety disorder and was getting my medication changed. And to really sort of explain to my husband, and my mother-in-law was staying with us while my medication was changing. So I was really my moods were really all over the place, to my parents. And so that's where the health interest came in. I also live in the greater Boston area, which has hospitals absolutely everywhere. Like, you can't, where I went to college, you can't spit and not hit a hospital, because there's a whole like just medical neighborhood, and that's where my college was located. And so we find a lot of people in the greater Boston area who do comics that are graphic medicine, which is the field of using comics to give information about medical subjects, either from the perspective of a provider or from a patient, to better assist in understanding. And I'm really interested in like the flu of 1918. That was one of my very early comics I did, was adapting a letter about the influenza that a doctor in Massachusetts had written to one of his colleagues. And it's been weird sort of watching as 2020 has happened, being able to go, oh yes, like I know about this. So I do actually have an upcoming comic in the COVID Chronicles that's being published by Graphic Mundi. I believe is coming out next month in February.
Yes.
We're recording this in January. And and so that'll be out this half of the year. And I did a piece in there about the history of flu pandemics in the 20th century. So that was really fun.
Awesome. I want to write that down because I want to double back on that. But you mentioned, everyone, like, you get into a conversation and somebody mentions a buzzword and you're like, oh, I have that story. You mentioned Master and Commander. I've never seen it.
Oh, it's a great movie.
I'm sure it is. It's just one of those things where it's like, how do I watch all the movies? I don't. But I have a connection to that movie. I was in the National Guard for 8 years, and during that time, my unit, both units, I ended up in 2 units, is up in Grayling, Michigan, Camp Grayling. It's the largest military installation east of the Mississippi River, is what we always say. But they took all the audio, like all the sounds, all the weapons and artillery that you hear was recorded at Camp Grayling. They went out to one of the artillery ranges and they set up all the equipment and they shot them off and they recorded all the sounds. So all that really great audio, I know that much. I know that it's supposed to be like a really great audio movie. They recorded it all just a couple hours north of here, where I used to go one weekend a month and 2 weeks. Yeah. So all these, like, I'm out there, I'm just schlepping around the ranges doing range inspections. And then I'm like, oh yeah, they did all that movie here. Cool. And so now I finally get a chance to say it into a microphone to a person who would appreciate it. That's it. I just wanted to tell you that story. It is, awesome. Isn't it? You mentioned the COVID Chronicles.
Yes.
And you mentioned the comic that you did on the 1918 influenza pandemic. Yes. How jarring was it? Let me back up. When did you do that piece on the 1918 flu pandemic?
I did that actually in 2018.
Okay. So in 2018, you do a comic about the influenza pandemic of 1918. I assume you did a lot of research. Somebody like yourself, you seem to have that in common with my wife, who is a research dork. She loves it. How weird was it to heavily research a piece on a pandemic and then live through a pandemic? And how often were you looking around your daily, day-to-day life and going, yep, okay, I remember. Oh, that happened in 1918. Literally see history repeat itself.
Yeah, well, I think what was also really interesting is that with the 1918 pandemic, it re-entered the U.S. In Boston, and which I live very close to Boston. There's a river, and I'm on the other side of the river, so that was sort of interesting to see. But then one of the big cases for COVID, starting on the East Coast, was actually in Boston on the waterfront. So fairly close to where it would have re-entered through where the 1918 flu re-entered, which was just one of those weird things. And then to be reading about the flu and seeing that there were like the schools were closed and restaurants were closed and theaters were closed. And in 2018, reading this, being like, wow, that's really wild that everything sort of shut down. And 2 years later, everything shut down and remains shut down. And it's a fascinating thing to look at the parallels. Obviously, there are lots of differences, but it still remains interesting to sit and look at these things and just sort of think like, okay, like they did this then, we're still doing the same things now. We still have people who are refusing to wear masks, and it sure is something.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up. For anyone who might be listening, just in case you're curious, This Is Not My Job is definitely pro-mask. I am trying to keep I want this to be accessible to everybody, but I also want to say, wear a fucking mask. Okay. Yeah. That's it. Just want to go on officially.
Wear a mask, punch Nazi.
What's that?
Said wear a mask, punch a
exactly.
Nazi.
Wear masks, punch Nazis. In case anybody wants, like, if this is the first time you're listening to the show and you're curious about who I am, who Ned is, Ned and I completely agree. Wear a mask, punch Nazis. If it's a Nazi not wearing a mask, they're probably in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. I'm sorry, I just couldn't. I want to digress just a little bit and say, like, look, if you were ever going to wear a mask, it should have been that day. Tactical geniuses, all of them. So you mentioned the COVID Chronicle, but you mentioned Biogen, which
yes,
it's so crazy. It hasn't even been a year since all of this erupted, but Biogen was sort of a, not the, but a ground zero for COVID.
Yeah, it was one of the super spreader events on the East Coast.
So this is, but you led me right into it, and I'm very pleased that it worked out this way, because that story is a story that you mentioned in the diary that you did from, I'd say roughly, I think like March of last year till about June.
Yes. So I actually started that project. Let's see, I think we went into lockdown on March 13th.
That's what I was. Yeah, I was in Philadelphia then. I was still living in Philadelphia, and that was the last day that I was actually out in the field doing my job. From that point forward, I've been working from home ever since.
Yeah. So so it was like March 13th, and I had actually we made a trip to Disney World in February. Okay. End of February, I got the flu. And so I had been away from work because of this vacation. I got the flu. I know it was the flu and it wasn't COVID because I had antivirals and it was gone. And I've had the flu before. And I was like, this is what this is. And I was supposed to go to Emerald City Comic Con, which was going to be my first trip to Seattle and my first comic convention in years, since 2014, as a visitor, not as a tabler. So I was really excited about that. And I was like saying like, oh, I don't feel good because I've got this flu. And then seeing the ground zero in Kingston, Washington, so just outside of Seattle, and going, okay, this isn't good. But I had sort of planned with my supervisor that I would push my schedule. So I'd come in on a Monday because I was flying out, I think, either Thursday night or Friday morning. And I wanted to make sure that I was flying out a Wednesday night. That's what it was. So I moved my schedule. So I was working on Monday, Tuesday, half day, Wednesday. And so I go into the office on the Monday and it was just like, oh, the show's been canceled. So, but I figured I'd still be in anyways and do what I was normally doing. And my supervisor was like, great. You need to pack your stuff. Because the university is going to be closing for 2 weeks on Friday, and make sure that you have all your things with you. And I was like, great, I'll be back in the office in 2 weeks, but I'll still go and I'll make sure that I clean my desk and that I wash my dishes. And really glad I washed my dishes.
They'd still be festering.
Oh God, I actually went to the office in December because it was in a temporary space and we're moving while the space that my office is usually in was being renovated, and the renovation has still been able to go on. So I was packing up my cube for everything to go into the office. But so that happened, and we went out to dinner with my husband and some of his coworkers on the Wednesday. And I remember sitting at the taco place, drinking margaritas with our friends, going, I have a feeling that this is the last time we're going to be doing this for a while. And it was either that night or the Tuesday before, when we started packing everything up, that I was like, I need to start writing this down, because this is going to be a major defining moment of my life, and I need to make sure that I have it written. And from there, it sort of went from looking at what was happening in the greater Boston area and my own life, to sort of looking at what was happening with COVID related to what was happening in 1918. And sort of each day, I was spending about 4 hours a day between writing and drawing and scanning and posting this comic. And it was exhausting. I made it to June and was just like, at this point, I was working on some pitch pages in May, so I took a 2-week break, and then I started back up again in June. I was like, I can't do this. Like, it is too exhausting. But to show what a year this has been, I had completely forgot that I had done that comic like at like 3 points during the year. I was like, I've done absolutely nothing this year. Mm-hmm. Completely forgetting that for a good 3 months, I was doing a daily journal history web comic. Mm-hmm. That was. Yeah, this year was crazy. But with doing that, with doing social distancing, which is what I named the comic, I was able to, it really helped with getting my thoughts into place, because otherwise I would have just sort of been numb. And I pulled on a lot of what I do as a mental health cartoonist, and using comics to help comprehend what I'm going through. And I found that with sharing these comics, that I was able to help other people. So I had people commenting on my webtoon going, I'm 13 years old and I'm scared. Thank you for making this comic so that I can see that adults are nervous too. Or even things like, that's really funny. I did the same thing last week, to just like, I don't know, like when I bought 16 pounds worth of pasta and built a fort. Like, what else are you going to do when you have all of these boxes of pasta, which I'm still eating?
You obviously make a fort. That's the first. You said 16 pounds of pasta. My brain went fort. That's the, I don't eat. Why eat it?
Yeah.
Make a fort.
It's not a very big fort.
Fort vermicelli.
Exactly.
The sturdiest fort on the East Coast. It's so crazy. Like, I think we're all going to have those stories. I remember 2020 was going to be the year that I was going to, I aspire to be an editor in comics. I like the idea of writing, but my anxiety just won't let that. I have writer brain and I have editor brain, and my editor brain overrides my writer brain every time. So the second that I write something, the editor comes right behind, is like, that's no. And it's wrong, but I can't just spill it out onto the page and sift stuff away. I love editing. So I was like, you know what? 2020, I'm going to every con that I can afford to go to. And it started with C2E2 at the end of February. At the end of February, C2E2 happened. And that was literally, as C2E2 was happening, that was when COVID was really first starting to become a threat in America. And I was there all 4 days. And like literally from Thursday to Sunday, by Sunday, if somebody coughed and didn't like vampire cough or, make an effort to obscure that, they would get daggers just stared right into the side of their head everywhere. You could see it. Following week, I was back in Philly. I was going to drive to New York City to see my friend. And on my way, it's only like a 2-hour drive. And on my way, I'm listening to the news on the radio, and they're like, oh, state of emergency declared in New York City. And I'm like, great. I ended up going because it was just like a sort of like bureaucratic one. Like, we're just calling a state of emergency so we can do stuff if we need to. Went out, had a drink with a friend, didn't think anything of it. The guy at the liquor store was wearing rubber gloves. That was kind of weird. The following week, Friday, March 13th, I was talking to a nurse and she was like, I think this is the last time I'm going to talk to somebody I don't like work with. I was like, yeah, I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
Cut to this exact conversation. But thinking back, like you run everything back through the filter. While I was in Chicago, my wife and my son had flown back to Michigan to see her parents. And while they were there, my son, who was just shy of 2 at that point, got real sick. Doctors didn't know what was wrong. He wouldn't eat. He was lethargic. All of the symptoms that we've come to associate with COVID. And he eventually got better. But now we're going to spend the rest of our lives going, did our son have COVID? Did we get COVID? Were we just asymptomatic that entire time? We've done everything right since then, but was that our encounter? Did we just second guessing?
It's really terrifying, and especially with someone with a really young kid who can't really communicate what he's going through, but it's been scary to just sort of look back and like I have a friend who was all through February was just not feeling good, and again the doctors couldn't figure out what it was, and he's just like, did I have COVID? Did I get other people sick? And we don't know. And I think we just have to, live with that. We don't know what had happened, but also say, okay, you know what? We don't know what happened, but we can do what we can now to prevent other people from getting sick. And that's really all we can do. I'm glad that your son's doing better though.
Really he's doing great, but now we're in the new phase, which is now my wife is pregnant with our second. So now we're,
oh, congratulations.
Thank you very much. So now we're going through the pandemic pregnant. And so now everything is hyper so right after Christmas, we found out that my in-laws got exposed. And so we had every week to 10 days, my wife and my son will go over there, stay the night. I get work done better when I have an empty house. Mm-hmm. We had to postpone that because they had to self-isolate and get tested, and they were negative, and thank goodness. And so just this past weekend, it was the first time that my wife and son had seen her parents / his grandparents since Christmas because of that. Mm-hmm. We're very fortunate that was the only delay, but it was a delay, and it's just but we have to be careful because we don't know how it affects pregnant, people who are pregnant. Mm-hmm. So it's so nerve-wracking.
It's one of those things you don't want to actually have a study to see how.
Yep, exactly. And we don't even we talked about if we have an opportunity to get the vaccine, she's not going to get it because there has been a lot of studies and they've tested this time and time again, but you can't ethically test a vaccine on a pregnant person. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I don't make the ethics. That's just the way it is. I wanted real quick, or I say real quick. It's an old. I did radio years ago, so there's this, real quick. I just want to. Yeah.
You have a really good radio voice.
I appreciate that. That's A, all that radio training, and B, it's that theater degree coming in handy. Boom, boom, boom. People used to tell me that theater degree was going to be useless, and then I started a podcast. That'll show them.
Who's laughing
exactly. No, let's just, I'm very, very fortunate to have a day job. Let's put it that way. I wanted to ask you mentioned it, and it's sort of one of the first things when you and I first connected via social media that I noticed about you, aside from our mutual affinity for lifting weights, which we'll talk about. You are a real big fan of T.E. Lawrence. Probably the biggest T.E. Lawrence fan that I've ever met.
Oh, I'm not the biggest fan that's out there.
I'm sure there's not. I'm sure, no matter what you love, no matter how much,
there's someone who's gonna love
there's going to be somebody who's just a friggin' lunatic. Like my wall of art behind me, you're going to be like, oh, that's T.E. Lawrence, and then that's T.E. Lawrence. Like there's somebody out there like that.
Yeah, I was going to say I have. Okay. No, it's not me. I have one piece hanging that's of him. And that's hanging above my bookshelf, because there would not be, if I had my own office space, I'd probably have more stuff hanging, but where my office is in my living room, if you try to make it so it's not an overbearing Ned space, but I have a bookshelf that's just filled with all of my T.E. Lawrence related books. And my picture is hanging up over that actually the librarian who had put together the exhibit that I went to in Dreamers of the Day, he's like, we have some extra copies of our beautiful A4 like screen printed, would you like one? And so he sent me one, which was really, really nice. So when I went over, I had a backpack, so I was like, I can't bring this like really nice piece back with me, so I have a much smaller, like, actually no, I think that's an A1. I have an A4. I had an A4 that was now at my office, but yeah, it's there. I don't have walls covered. I just have a bookshelf.
The T.E. Lawrence room. Briefly, you said A4. Are you referring to the size of the paper?
Yes. Yeah.
That popped up on Twitter like last week. I think it was Gail Simone tweeted about something about how America doesn't use paper sizes, and Australian comic book writer Tom Taylor was flabbergasted. Like a lot of people from overseas were suddenly like, "Wait,
we use paper sizes, but we don't. Our paper sizes are really strange compared to the rest of the world. And all the A will like fold into each other, which is great, and B all folds into each other. And then you have Americans who are like 8.5 by 11 and 11 by 17 and 9 by 12, and they're all different proportions, which is really frustrating when you're trying to lay something out. I ran a literary magazine, co-ran a literary magazine that was based in Scotland. And so we were like, all right, everything we're doing is A5. So we had this beautiful little A5 book. So when I would do art requests, and we had artists who would contribute, I would request for it to be sent to us either A3 or A4, so that we could scale it down, and in case we wanted to use it for other promotional purposes, we could be like, okay, we have this A4 drawing that someone's done, but it's at 600 DPI, so we can blow it up to, proportionally, it will now be an A0. So it looks good when it's printed big, but it's so difficult to do here. Yeah.
That is, I think the fact that like America is only one of 3, I think, countries that still is on the imperial system. Like, to me, that's that every time I see a measurement, I get mad because guys, the metric.
The Brits dropped the imperial system mostly. I mean, they still use it. That's this is like 50-50. No, when my husband moved over, he was printing out his resume, and I said, I'm going to have to readjust this so that it's not A4, it's 8.5 by 11. And that was the thing that broke him, was the paper sizes.
That was it.
Because there's always like, when you move to another country, there's always like that one small thing that you'll just be like, I just can't with this. And for him, it was paper size. Yeah, I can't remember what it was for me. I think for me, it was probably shoe size that like really threw me when I was in the UK, because I had to figure out what my UK shoe size was compared to my US shoe size compared to my European shoe size, and there are just too many numbers, and now I have to do it all over again because I have to figure out what my men's shoe size is.
I went through that. It's I worked in retail. I worked there was a Timberland outlet in Birch Run, Michigan that I worked at for years. I worked at JCPenney. I stared at the inside of so many shoes that have the tags with all the other sizes on it, and I wanted to order a pair of shoes that I had to know, I think it was the UK or Euro size. And I was so frustrated because I was like, all the shoes that I've seen in my life, and I never once paid attention to the other sizes. Like, it never occurred to me that I might need to know that at some point. So then I had to figure it out. And I've got I have huge feet. Sometimes I wear a 14, but usually I can squeeze into a 13. And you got to freaking tape measure out and measure all this stuff. This is dumb. But anyway, I didn't mean to digress so much about paper.
I have a graphic design background. My first job was at a publishing house, as a printing broker in Glasgow. So like, paper is something that I think about a lot. But
no,
digressing off of paper digression.
That was something that research could not have told me. I did as much research on you as I could, and nothing told me that you were a paper nerd. So that's kind of on me, I guess, but it's kind of on you for not putting that out there.
It's all out there in very coded things. We're talking about how much I love stationery.
Yeah. Well, okay. So you bring up an excellent point. I should have known that. The trip to England, what brought that on? I tried to kind of parse it, so I figured I would just let you explain it in your own words. Was it T.E. Lawrence and researching him that took you to this trip, or did you discover the affinity while you were there?
Oh, so I joke that 2021 is the 10-year anniversary of how much I love this dumbass. In that it was the summer of 2011 that I read, I first started reading his work and reading about him. So I've had an affinity for him for a very, very long time. So this trip was me going. I had actually on Twitter, as always, seen. I saw a tweet about the exhibit at Magdalen College, and I was like, "Oh, that's really cool." Annoyingly, it was opening while I was actually in Scotland for my birthday, but we were so booked that there was no way that I was going to be able to get down to Oxford to go to this exhibit. So I just had it filed away in the back of my head and was reading a bit more about what was going on with the exhibit and the lecture series that was going with it. And I just decided, like, I said to my husband, "No, I'd really like to do this trip. You're welcome to come with me." And he was just like, "The idea of going on this trip with you and not being able to do anything with you because you'll be in a library the whole time just doesn't really sound that much fun." So he stayed home. I did the trip. So this exhibition that was put on was a collection of Lawrence's materials, like his books, things that he owned at Magdalen College, which he had a fellowship from, and they are working to amass a good research collection of his materials and archives related to him through his biographers and mentors have Magdalen connections, so they've got more archival stuff there. And I RSVP'd for the lecture, and I said, coming over from the States, I'd really love an opportunity to look at the material, to attend the exhibit without tons of people. I'm doing this book. And they're like, "Great, you can do this. While you're here, is there anything else that you'd like to do?" And I said, I would really like to get into the Bodleian and do some archival work, but I'm not affiliated with the university. This is all on my own. And they're like, "Well, here's the person that you email." And emailed that person. It turns out that the Bodleian is actually open to anyone who wants to do research as long as you have a good reason to do it. So you can go over and it's like, "I want to look at like these planning documents. I want to read this stuff." And as long as you let them know that you're coming so they can prepare the materials for you, because it takes a couple of days to actually get all the boxes and move the boxes from the storage units to the reading room where you'll actually sit and do the reading, which is very cool. So I was able to actually do this trip, and because when I had planned it, I was still working my previous job. I had it be 5 or 6 days, and had I realized I was not going to be working a 40-hour week job when I came back, I would have lengthened the trip by a day or two so that I wasn't spending all of my waking hours sitting in a library, which is wonderful, but I didn't get to see any of Oxford, which is really sad. Including realizing, like, I didn't realize until a couple months ago that the hotel I stayed at was like diagonally across the street from where Lawrence went to high school. And I didn't realize it at the time. And I was like, I could have been taking photos of like this building that had I turned left, I would have seen it. But I was always like, the 2 times I went down the street in that direction, I turned right because it was just behind where I needed, like, I was going in one direction and it was just in the other. And so that was, I was hoping to go back in 2020 to attend a symposium about Lawrence and do more archival work, be able to spend more time in Oxford, but that did not happen.
2020. I can't even say the number without like just deeply sighing. I can't remember if it was in the comic or if it was on Twitter, but you mentioned the film Lawrence of Arabia, the epic film, and how that even kind of undersells T.E. Lawrence as a person. Without going too far down that rabbit hole, they're gonna remake Lawrence of Arabia. They're gonna retell the story of T.E. Lawrence, and they are hiring the Ned Barnett as the casting director. Who are you casting as T.E. Lawrence?
Oh God, I think we'd actually want to go with someone who's unknown.
Absolutely. Okay.
Like I really I don't know if that person exists yet, but I can't think of anyone who's in Hollywood now who I would cast as
Live
him.
your truth. If that's the answer, I'm not gonna push you and be like, come on, there's like 19 actors. There's at least 20 actors in Hollywood, right?
Well, I tweeted someone had did a like, who would you cast in your biopic as yourself, and someone had misread it and was like, why are you playing like this actor? Like, clearly you should be playing T.E. Lawrence. And I was like, I'm so glad that this is my brand. Like, yeah. I'm the right height and I have the right hair color, but I cannot do an Oxford accent.
And you know what? Knowing that you can't do an accent, that's a skill in and of itself. My wife is a gifted a performer of accents. I suck. I'm terrible. I'm very terrible with accents. We did a show. We directed a play with our theater company a couple years ago, and she was handling the dialects. And there was a guy that we cast in the show that could not do Northern English. It sounded more Irish. And we were like, okay, guess he's Irish now. And we just leaned into it, and he crushed the Irish accent. Me, anytime I try and do it, I'd make Dick Van Dyke sound like just a pro. Yeah. So we're kind of coming up to the end here. There are a couple things. Let's see if I can squeeze it in. I mentioned our mutual affinity for weightlifting. I think that was kind of like one of the first things we bonded over was our love of lifting weights and hugs. I think, okay, so that's what 2020, I was going to go to Emerald City. I was going to go to TCAF for the first time. I might have gotten to hug you in Emerald City. I thought about going to, there was a chance I was going to go to Thought Bubble. All of it gone. I got my first passport at the age of 41 and nothing. Well,
the good news is you don't have to worry about getting a passport once we are able to travel again.
I'll have the passport, but I'm still an American, and I wouldn't blame anybody if they didn't let me in. I totally get it. They're like, beat it.
I mean, I'm an American married to a Brit, so no one's going to want to get us. No. They'll just show up and they'll be like, please leave.
They will give you a swift exit from the premises, or in his case, a Brexit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Specifically, you and I share the affinity for powerlifting. For those of you who don't know, powerlifting is just weightlifting, but more. I guess you just do more weight, less reps is generally how it goes. I used to be like a fit guy, like I was lean and all that stuff, and then I just remembered that I like to eat, and so I started powerlifting because that's your excuse. Is you're like, as you're mowing down on your third peanut butter sandwich of the day, you're like, it's leg day, and just kind of mowing down. But you, in that diary comic that you wrote, you described powerlifting as slow, methodical, and heavy. And in that same comic, you also kind of use similar language in reference to drawing, specifically the penciling stage of your art. Do you think there's some sort of correlation or connection between your love for powerlifting and how you view penciling? Is penciling the stage of the process that you particularly enjoy?
Inking is my favorite stage of the process. Okay. Penciling is a lot of frustration, but I do enjoy it. It's sort of like when it's the warm up stage of powerlifting. I miss powerlifting deeply. I haven't been to the gym since I got sick, so it's been close to a year. And so I forgot what I was saying.
Did you talk about penciling and
slow, methodical? Yeah, I mean it's penciling is slow and methodical. I was just got lost in brain space thinking about how much I missed the gym and also how grateful I was that I had. For years, I had I'm going to get a 200-pound deadlift, and for years I chased it, and for years I kept missing it, and then I think about a year ago, I got the 200-pound deadlift, which was like my big fitness goal for 2020. And I was so happy that I hit that. And then all this happened, and all I could just think of is like, at least I hit that deadlift goal. Mm-hmm. I'm happy with how things have gone this year because I hit my deadlift goal.
And for those of you who don't lift, this is not a judge. I don't want to be, do you even lift? I respect you, Ned, for a lot of reasons, but you put a lot of purchase in, or a lot of stock in deadlifting. The joke is, what do you bench? I don't care what you bench. I want to know what you deadlift.
Yeah.
And that first bench. Time, I'm 6'2", And I've got these, and I've got the wingspan of somebody not significantly taller, but I've got long arms, big hands. And so like getting that weight like it feels like it takes forever to get all the way down here. But when you set up do you go with PR or PB, personal record or personal best?
I do PR, but
okay. I just wanted to get the nomenclature straight. The first time my wife, Katie, hit her PR, she pulled 225. Nice. We lost our minds. We were in the basement of our downtown Flint YMCA at the time. She had just started. She was kind of like a wonderkind. Mm-hmm. But if you saw her, I mean, she's 6 foot tall. She's very, strong like bull, or just strong like tall wife, I guess. But yeah, she started out 135, came up pretty easy. And once she got to 185, there was a little bit of a plateau. But once she broke through and hit that 225, the elation that you feel when you hit that PR on a deadlift.
Oh my God, it's amazing. It's like
ripping that iron away from gravity.
Mm-hmm. It is probably the best feeling in the world when you get to that point and just crush it. And then you go, I hit this deadlift. I'm going to go have a milkshake at 9 a.m. because I absolutely crushed it.
I've earned it.
I have earned this. I hurt, but this is great. This is worth.
This kind of leads me. There's my dog. Say hello to Vinny. There's Vinny.
Hi, Vinny.
Hi. Say hi to Ned. This actually kind of ties into the last thing I wanted to talk to you about. Just to get a little silly at the end here. You and I also share an affinity for the Australian children's program, Bluey.
Yes, I love Bluey.
For those of you who don't know, it's on Disney Plus. I believe it airs current episodes air on Disney Junior, but the first season is available on Disney Plus, and it's the most precious thing. It follows the Healer family, father Bandit, mother Chili, and then their two daughters, Bluey and Bingo. And I am just obsessed with how great that show is for kids, but it's also so very good. Entertaining for adults.
I genuinely love just like how the focus of it is on imaginative play, and they're not trying. There's not like trying to be a kid's show and like teach you the alphabet. It's just like this family is just having like these great, like the two girls have amazing imaginations, and I love how Bandit and Chili like play into it, and I also just love the fact that Bandit is an archaeologist and he's a dog.
Yes. Okay. Now see,
he's up bones for a living, and Chili works as an airport security. Like these are just like little like details that I just love.
No, you're absolutely right. But that leads me to, because my wife and I've had this conversation several times, and I want to run it by another Bluey enthusiast, which is that show is a great show for kids, but there are a lot of questions that it leaves unanswered for me, like because I've watched it so many times now. Like, for example, we've never seen a human on this show. What's going on? Were there humans? Did the dogs rise up? Are those bones that Bandit is digging up the bones of the humans that they wiped off? Did humans become the dogs? Because these dogs have clothes. You see them folding clothes and hanging laundry, but they never wear clothes. You see, like the more you think about this,
and they're like one of the things when they're at the preschool and like they play Romans.
Yes,
and it's like they know who the Romans are, but like I don't. All I can think of is that this is like some future where humans have anthropomorphized into dogs. The aliens have come and mixed humans and dogs to get the best features of both, and all the crappy humans are gone forever, and we're just anthropomorphic dogs now. And that's all I can think. That's the only explanation for it.
The Roman thing never occurred to me. You're absolutely right, but I love the idea that aliens were like, "Oh, this is your best friend. Let's put them together. Dogs are man's best friend. Let's put them together." Because like then there's the barbecue episode where Bingo was running around getting all the ingredients for the pepper salad, and Bandit is telling a joke, talking about the story with the farmer and the sheep. Who is this farmer? Is this an old tale from the old times when there were still people? Why does he have this memory? Why is he telling this story? It's so like, and like you said, like, I found out about Chili's job probably like you did through the Bluey Wiki, because it's never really explicitly mentioned what she does.
I went down a Bluey Wiki rabbit hole. We have a lot of Bluey saved up for when we're having like a really bad day. So we just keep it in reserve, just like we keep Craig of the Creek in reserve. Like we have all these great shows. Bluey is just like, it's just sitting waiting for us for hopefully not having a really shitty day, because that would suck to have a shitty day, but at least we have like half a season of Bluey to watch. But
that's last night I told my, like, yesterday was a particularly rough day, and I told her, I was like, I think I live in a state, when I was in Philadelphia I had a medical marijuana card. Now I live in a state where recreational is legal, so it's fine. I said, I think I want to take an extra edible and watch Ted Lasso and cry. Like, that's all I wanted to do last night. I discovered that show like a lot of people did late last year, and it was just such a breath of fresh air. So I just go back and revisit that. Bluey's the same thing. I'm so glad my son took to it so well, because otherwise I would just subject him to it anyway, because I'm the adult. I can do that. And I feel like if I'm subjecting him to children's programming, it's not the worst thing I could do.
No, particularly if it's like Bluey and it's entertaining and wonderful. So, we had an order Indian food and watch like 3 episodes of Craig of the Creek last night. We were just like, we can't do it. This is just what we're existing with. So
yep, I totally get it. Ned Barnett, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for being the first guest on This Is Not My Job. We did it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.
I appreciate it. So I think this is where I hit stop now. Okay, say bye.
Bye.
Thank you once again for listening to the show. I'd like to thank my guest on the show today, Ned Barnett. If you're curious about his work, you can check him out on Twitter at the Ned Barnett. That's all one word, and there are 2 T's at the end of Barnett. You can, if you would like to see some of his work, you can go to his website, which is thenedbarnett.storeenvy.com. And Store Envy is spelled STORENVY. thenedbarnett.storeenvy.com. Thank you, everybody, for coming back and listening to episode 2. I really appreciate it. You can check out the show on, where are we at now? We're on Apple, we are on Spotify, we are on YouTube, we are on Stitcher, and we are on Google Podcasts. For right now, Google Podcasts seems to take a few days to, once the RSS feed updates, Google seems to be the last one to get it. I'm not sure what's going on there with that. But yeah, I don't know if I mentioned it, just in case. I'm going to say it again. We are also on YouTube now. The episodes are there. It's literally just a graphic and audio, but if that's your preferred way to listen to things, we are on YouTube as well. I can be found on Twitter at BigCity0. If you'd like to follow the show on Twitter, it's at NotMyJobPod. I'll see you all back here in 2 weeks with our next episode. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you then. Bye-bye.